The chairs scraped against the hardwood floor like a warning I didn't listen to. My father stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table, the same way he had every year since I was 7 years old, carving knife in one hand, glass of red wine in the other. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey and candle wax. My grandmother's china was out. My mother had ironed the tablecloth. Everything looked the way it always looked, warm, familiar, arranged with the kind of careful precision that hides the things a family doesn't want to say out loud. He didn't pick up the carving knife that evening. He picked up the wine glass instead, cleared his throat, and smiled at the table the way men smile when they've already made a decision and are only now bothering to tell you about it. "I want to say something before we eat," he said. "This year has been hard on all of us, especially on your brother." He paused, letting the room absorb that. My brother sat 2 seats to my left, staring at his empty plate. He's been dealt a rough hand. The eviction, the situation with the loan, none of that was entirely his fault. He needs somewhere stable to land. My father looked directly at me then, not at the center of the table, not at the room, at me. "Rachel is going to let him move into her condo. She has space, she's practical, she understands what family means." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable kind. My aunt stopped reaching for the breadbasket. My cousin looked sideways at her husband. My mother was already nodding slowly, the way she does when something has been agreed upon before the conversation even started. My brother finally looked up from his plate, and the expression on his face wasn't surprise. It wasn't gratitude. It was the quiet, practiced blankness of someone who already knew what was coming and had simply been waiting for it to be delivered on his behalf. I set down my fork. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask whether anyone had thought to check with me first, because I already knew the answer. Instead, I reached for my own wine glass, lifted it slowly, and looked at my father across the length of my grandmother's tablecloth. "No," I said. Just that. One word, even and clear, landing in the middle of all that careful china and candlelight like a stone dropped into still water. My father's smile thinned. "Rachel." I said no. My mother leaned forward. "This isn't the time to be selfish." "Then let's find another time," I said, and I set the glass down, folded my napkin beside my plate, and pushed my chair back from the table. I drove home through a city that was already dark and quiet, the highway mostly empty, the radio off. I didn't feel angry. I felt something colder and steadier than anger, something that had been sitting underneath the surface of every family dinner for the past several years, waiting for the moment someone would say the quiet part loud enough for me to finally hear it clearly. "My name is Rachel Holt. I'm 32 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst at a firm downtown. I bought my condo 3 years ago with a down payment I saved over 5 years of deliberate, disciplined choices, skipped vacations, no new car, 12-hour days, a lunch I packed myself every single morning, because I had a number I was trying to reach, and I wasn't going to let anything slow me down. I worked for that place the way some people work for something they love. And I did love it. Not because it was impressive, or because it looked good on paper. Because it was mine. The first thing in my life that was entirely, undeniably mine. My brother, for context, is 29 years old. He has moved 4 times in 3 years. He has started and abandoned 2 businesses. He has borrowed money from my parents, from our aunt, from 2 family friends who no longer come to holidays. He has never once, in my memory, been told that a consequence was his to carry alone. Every time something collapsed around him, a hand appeared to cushion the fall. Sometimes it was my parents. Sometimes it was money that I would later trace back to conversations I had not been invited into. The eviction my father mentioned had happened 6 weeks earlier. My brother had stopped paying rent on an apartment he could not afford because he had spent the money on a business idea that lasted 11 days. The landlord had been patient. Then the landlord had not been patient. Then there were notices. And then there was a date. And then there was a moving truck and boxes sitting in my parents' garage. And apparently, somewhere between the moving truck and Thanksgiving, my family had decided that the solution was my condo. I pulled into my parking space, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark for a long moment. My phone was already lighting up on the passenger seat. 3 missed calls from my mother. 1 text from my brother that read simply, "You didn't have to do that in front of everyone." I looked at that message for a while. I thought about the years I had spent making things easier for people who never once thought to ask whether easy was something I had access to. I put the phone face down on the seat and went inside. That night, I made tea and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. Not because I was planning anything dramatic, because I needed to think, and thinking clearly has always required a hard surface and something warm to hold. I opened my email. I opened my bank statements. I had gotten into the habit over the past 2 years of keeping clean records. Not because I expected to need them, but because I am, by profession and by temperament, someone who documents things. It's reflexive. It's how I see the world. Numbers tell the truth in ways that people sometimes don't. I started scrolling. I was looking for something specific. 3 months earlier, my father had called me about a refinancing situation my brother was navigating. The details had been vague and urgent in the way my family's financial requests always were, lots of emotional context, very little practical specificity. He had mentioned that my brother needed a co-signer on a small personal loan, just to get through the gap until his new income stream stabilized. He had said it would be quick, just a formality, that I wouldn't even feel it. He had emailed me a document. I had been in the middle of a quarterly close at work, exhausted and distracted, and I had skimmed it and signed where he told me to sign and sent it back and put it out of my mind. I had never read that document fully. I found the email. I opened the attachment. I read it carefully this time, from the first line to the last. It wasn't a small personal loan. It was a secured line of credit. The collateral listed, and this is the part that took me 3 readings to fully absorb, because my brain kept insisting it must have been a mistake. The collateral listed was my condominium, my address, my property, my name on the title. My father had, in a document I had been rushed into signing, tied my home to my brother's debt. I closed the laptop. I sat very still for a long time. Here is the thing about clarity. It doesn't always feel the way people describe it. People talk about clarity like it's a relief, like a light turning on. What I felt that night was not relief. It was the specific, physical sensation of understanding something you cannot ununderstand, of looking at a room you have lived in for years and suddenly seeing the architecture beneath the walls. My family had not decided at Thanksgiving that my brother should live in my condo. That decision, or something close to it, something with legal teeth, had already been made 3 months ago, in a document I had signed on a Tuesday afternoon without reading it. They had not asked me. They had arranged it. I did not sleep much that night. The next morning, my mother showed up at my door at 9 o'clock. She was wearing her coat over her pajamas, which meant she had left the house in a hurry, which meant she had been waiting since early morning for a reasonable hour and had finally decided 9 was close enough. She had a coffee from the place on my corner, which she handed to me when I opened the door, which is how I knew this was going to be a long conversation. I let her in. I made my own coffee. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and waited. "You embarrassed your father," she said. He announced a decision about my home to 20 people before mentioning it to me. He was trying to solve a problem. It's not his problem to solve with my property. She sighed with her whole body, the way she has always sighed when she wants me to understand the weight she carries. "Your brother is struggling. He doesn't have your advantages." I created my advantages. "Not entirely. We helped you. We supported you. You helped me go to college," I said. "I paid for everything after that. The firm, the savings, the down payment, none of that came from anyone in this family. I know because I tracked every dollar." She looked at me the way she looks at things she finds inconvenient. "This isn't about money. It's about your brother needing stability." "I know what it's about," I said. She paused. Then she shifted. Her voice softened, just slightly, into the register she uses when she's about to say the thing she actually means. "You know your father already took care of the paperwork, right? The loan situation. He figured it all out. You just need to let your brother stay for a while, 6 months, maybe a year, until he gets back on his feet. That's all." There it was. I looked at my mother across the table and thought about all the times I had absorbed a sentence like that one and turned it into something more manageable in my mind, smoothed it over, filed it under, "This is just how families work," and moved on. I thought about the document I had read the night before. I thought about my brother's blank face at the Thanksgiving table, already knowing, already waiting. "I need you to leave," I said. "Rachel, I'm not angry. I'm not being dramatic. I need you to leave so I can make some calls." She left. She took her coffee. She paused in the doorway and looked back at me with an expression I had seen before on her face and never fully named until that moment. It was not concern, it was calculation. She was assessing whether I was bluffing. I was not bluffing. I spent that day on the phone and at my laptop. The first call was to a real estate attorney, a woman my colleague had used 2 years prior and spoken about with the kind of quiet confidence you only use for someone who genuinely helped you. I explained the document. I explained the circumstances. I explained that I had signed something without fully reading it because I had trusted the person who sent it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me to send her the file, and I sent it before we hung up. The second call was to my bank. I requested a full account review, flagged the loan instrument, asked what my exposure looked like and what remediation options existed. The woman I spoke with was professional and clear. The picture she painted was not catastrophic yet, but it was not comfortable either. There were steps I needed to take quickly. The third call I almost didn't make. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time before I dialed my father. He answered on the second ring. I read the document, I said. A pause. Rachel, I can explain. I know you can. I'm not calling to hear the explanation. I'm calling to tell you that I've spoken to an attorney, and I'm taking steps to remove my property from this situation. I wanted you to know directly from me before you heard it another way. You're overreacting. I might be, I said. I'll let the attorney tell me. I ended the call. What happened next was not dramatic in the way people might expect. There was no screaming. There was no confrontation in a parking lot. There was no moment where I stood at the center of a room and delivered a speech. What happened was paperwork. Legal correspondence. A process that my attorney navigated with the kind of calm efficiency that makes you understand why people pay for lawyers. It was slow and quiet and entirely unglamorous, and it was also, without question, the most important thing I have ever done. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my father organized a family meeting. He called it a conversation, which is the word my family uses when they mean something has already been decided and they want it to look like a discussion. My grandmother's living room, Sunday afternoon, the full extended cast aunts, uncles, cousins, the family friends who had been around long enough to feel like relatives. I knew what it was. I went anyway, not because I thought it would change anything, because I am, in the end, someone who shows up. The room was arranged, the way rooms are arranged when someone wants to conduct a reckoning. My parents on the couch at the center, my brother in the armchair to the left, eyes down, shoulders folded, the rest of the family distributed around the edges like a jury that had already deliberated. My father stood when I walked in. We're glad you came, he said, in the voice he uses when he wants something to sound formal. We thought it was important to address what's been happening as a family, because family is how we solve our problems. He spoke for several minutes. He talked about my brother's situation in the language of misfortune, as if the eviction had been weather, as if the debt had been an illness no one could have prevented. He talked about the responsibility of family members who had been given more to support family members who had been given less. He looked at me twice while he said this. The second time, he used the word ungrateful. Someone in the room murmured in agreement. I sat very still. My uncle, who I have always liked, cleared his throat from the corner. Rachel, we're not trying to attack you. We just want to understand why you're making this so difficult. I haven't made anything difficult, I said. I've made something impossible. Those are different. My mother's jaw tightened. Your brother needs your help, she said. It's a simple ask. It's not simple, I said, and it wasn't an ask. It was a document signed without my informed consent. That's not a family request. That's a legal matter, and I'm treating it like one. The room shifted. Not loudly. Just the kind of collective exhale that happens when a group of people realizes the conversation they plan to have is not the one that's actually happening. My father's voice hardened. I did what I thought was best for this family. For which member of it? I asked. He didn't answer. I looked around the room at the faces I had grown up with, at the people who had watched me work and save and build, and had apparently understood that work and saving and building as a resource available to them. I didn't feel rage. I felt something cleaner than rage. I felt the very precise and clarifying experience of understanding exactly where I stood. I love this family, I said, but I will not be financially responsible for choices I didn't make and debts I didn't incur. That's not cruelty. That's a boundary. And if a boundary reads as abandonment to you, that tells me something about what you've expected of me. No one said anything. I picked up my coat from the arm of the chair where I'd placed it when I walked in. I said goodbye to my grandmother, who was sitting near the window and who squeezed my hand and said nothing, but looked at me for a long moment in a way that felt, somehow, like the most honest thing that had happened in that room all afternoon. I drove home in the early winter dark, the city lights orange and quiet through the windshield. And I tried to locate grief inside myself because I expected to find it. I found something else instead. Not happiness. Not relief exactly. Just the very particular stillness that comes from having done the thing you knew you had to do. From having said the words you had been rehearsing in the back of your mind for longer than you admitted to yourself. The legal process took 4 weeks. My attorney was thorough and she was good. The document my father had sent me contained several irregularities language that exceeded what I had been told it contained, terms that had not been verbally disclosed. She corresponded with the lending institution on my behalf. She submitted a formal challenge. By the 3rd week of December, my condo had been formally decoupled from the instrument. The loan remained. It remained entirely in my brother's name, as it should have been from the beginning. I received a voicemail from my father the evening my attorney confirmed the outcome. His voice was quieter than I expected. There was no shouting, no ultimatum, only a long pause before he said, "I hope you understand what you've done to this family." He did not leave a return message. He did not say he hoped I was doing well. He hung up, and the voicemail ended with the sound of a room I had spent every holiday of my life in, empty and still. I stood in my kitchen and played it twice. I thought about what he meant by what you've done to this family. I thought about what a family is, and what it costs to be the person in a family who is counted on to make the difficulty disappear. I thought about the 5 years I had spent getting here, the early mornings, the skipped weekends, and the years of packing my lunch and taking the slower train because I was building towards something of my own. And I thought about what it would have meant to hand that thing to someone who had not built it and would not have protected it. I thought about my brother, and I want to be careful here, because the story I am telling is not one about a villain. My brother is not cruel. He is not malicious. He is simply someone who has never been left alone long enough with his own consequences to understand that consequences are real, that they accumulate, that they do not vanish because someone who loves you is willing to absorb them. He has been protected from that truth his entire life, and the people who protected him believed they were being kind, and perhaps they were, in the small individual moments, even as the larger thing they were building was its own kind of disaster. He called me 2 days before Christmas. I picked up. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I didn't know about the condo thing. Not all of it." I believed him, partly. "I know you didn't handle it," I said. "I still let it happen," he said, which surprised me. I needed something to work out. I'm tired of things not working out. "I know," I said. "I need you to find a way to make things work out that doesn't involve my name on a document." "Yeah." Another silence. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," I said, and I meant it. We didn't talk for long. We didn't resolve anything large or permanent. But something moved slightly in the call. The way something moves when two people both decide to be honest for a moment, instead of performing what they think the other person needs. I hung up and stood at my window and watched the street below. The Christmas lights on the shops, a couple walking a dog in matching red coats, the city quiet and working and alive. My parents did not call on Christmas. I spent Christmas morning at my apartment with a friend who had nowhere to be and a bottle of good champagne and a ridiculous amount of cheese, and we watched old movies and talked about things that had nothing to do with any of the preceding weeks. And it was, genuinely, one of the more peaceful mornings I can remember. In January, I went back to work. I submitted a proposal for a project I had been hesitant about because I had been uncertain whether I would have the energy for it, the clarity, the capacity to take on something new while the rest of my life was demanding so much. I had the energy. I submitted it. It was approved. I heard, through a cousin who is better at family communication than I am, that my brother had enrolled in a workforce program, that he had taken a part-time job in the meantime, and that he was staying in my parents' house and contributing something toward his stay. I don't know how much of this will hold. I don't know what the next chapter looks like for him. But I know it will be his chapter, not mine, and that distinction matters more than I can properly explain. My mother texted me in February. No context, no greeting, Just a link to a news article about housing costs in the city. I stared at the text for a long time. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I will. And the conversation we have will be honest in a way the ones before it weren't. Maybe it won't happen at all. I've stopped trying to predict which future is coming, because I've learned that I am not as good at that as I thought I was, and that the future I was preparing for was sometimes the one other people were building for me. What I know is this. In March, I stood in my kitchen on a Saturday morning. No calls to return, no documents to review, no emergencies requiring my immediate financial intervention, and I drank coffee and read a book I'd been meaning to read for 2 years and listened to the building settle around me. My building, my walls, my particular quality of morning light, and I felt the specific satisfaction of something that has not been taken from you. There is a version of this story where I am the villain. I know that. I know there are people in my family who tell it that way, who describe what I did as cold and calculating and self-interested, who say I chose my property over my brother when he was already down. I understand why the story looks like that from certain angles. I don't think I can change that, and I've mostly made my peace with it. But here is what I know from the inside. I didn't choose property over my brother. I chose honesty over the performance of love. I chose to stop pretending that obligation and affection are the same thing, that a family relationship earns automatic access to what I've built, that the measure of how much I care is how much I'm willing to absorb. Loving someone and funding someone are not the same action. You can do one without the other. I am allowed to love my brother and refuse to be the floor he falls on. Those things can coexist. It took me a long time to believe that without a disclaimer attached, to say it plainly rather than quietly, to let it stand on its own without apology. The Thanksgiving table is still there, I assume. My mother's iron tablecloth, my grandmother's china, my father's wine glass. The ritual will continue because rituals do, with or without the people who have quietly declined to take their assigned seats. I'll be at my own table. I bought a small one, dining table, solid oak, seats 4, from a shop 2 blocks from my condo on a Saturday in late March when the weather had just started to turn. I carried the box up the stairs myself and assembled it on my living room floor, instruction sheets spread out beside me, glass of water on the windowsill. It took 2 hours. I got the legs wrong the first time and had to take one side apart and start over. When I finished, I stood back and looked at it. I thought about all the tables I had sat at and the arrangements that had been made around me while I was busy being reliable, the assumptions built into the place setting on my left, the expectations folded under my seat, like something I was meant to find and carry out without comment. I pulled out a chair and sat down. The room was quiet. The city outside was doing what it always does, moving, building, making noise, getting on with itself. The light was good. The table was solid beneath my hands. I thought about a toast not the kind made at someone else's table, not the kind that arrives with a condition sewn into its lining, just the private, silent kind, the kind you make when no one is watching and nothing is being asked, to knowing the difference between love and debt, and choosing, finally and without apology, to carry only what is genuinely mine.